Have you been told that it's time you settled down? That you're making far too many job choices and that's going to make you unemployable? Have you been told to just pick something and stick with it, otherwise you'll never get anywhere in life? I'm here today to tell you that all of that advice is wrong. Hello and welcome to Through the Noise Coaching. My name is Lee and I'm a leadership coach specialised in growing the careers of driven mid to senior neurospices, and this video is particularly aimed at those of you with ADHD or that consider yourself multipotentialite. Today I'm talking about the generalists, the ones who get bored doing the same thing day in, day out, the ones whose CVs are a mixture of sometimes eclectic things, or the ones that took a career risk to change to do something different, or the ones that really want to. The ones that constantly feel like they're doing it wrong because they're not just specialising and following one path. You're the people that I'm talking to today. You see, the corporate world is looking for specialists. Job specs are becoming more and more specialised. More and more people have degrees, so their master's degrees are being required, and in some cases PhDs in very narrow subjects are being required as well. The world is asking for specialists, but is that really what it needs? But you watching this video, you're not one of those specialists. So today I'm going to try and ease some of that self-doubt that's creeping up on you the more I talk about this specialism, and tell you some of the reasons why your generalist skills are hugely valuable and hugely amazing. So let's go. In order to do so, I have thoroughly read the book Range: How Generalists Triumph in a Specialised World by David Epstein. I would hold it up, but I read it on my Kindle, so imagine it there. And when I say that I thoroughly read it, I thoroughly read all but the last two chapters, because the last two chapters were just repeating the same points over and over again. But I read all the important parts, and that's what I'm going to bring to you today. Part 1. Evidence. I probably don't even need to motivate you to think of specialists in their fields. The examples that Range give are Tiger Woods, obviously famously known for golf, but also you would have heard the story if not the name, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Laszlo Polgar, who had 3 daughters that he wanted to become chess prodigies, so he worked incredibly hard on training them in chess, and they did become chess prodigies as a result of that. Specialist stories are not hard to find. We've all heard of the 10,000 hour rule. To become an expert at something, you need to put 10,000 hours of meaningful, purposeful practice into that particular thing. And while it's true that amazing prodigies exist, and there are specialists that have dedicated their lives to particular topics, that's not the only path forward. And if it was, then prodigies would dominate absolutely every field, and that is just not the case. The book starts with the fact about the German national football team who won the World Cup in 2014, and I didn't believe this at first, so I went and found the paper. I'll tell you about that in a second. But what the fact was, is that all the players on the winning German National Football League, they actually didn't play football beyond amateur level until they were 22 years or older. So I went and found the paper myself because I'm a bit sceptical. The paper is called Practice and Playing the Development of German Top-Level Professional Football Players, and it was published 2 years later. Let me read you a quote here. National team differed from amateurs in more non-organised leisure football in childhood, more engagement in other sports in adolescence, later specialisation, and in more organised football only at age 22 plus years. Now you might say that is a fluke or a counterexample, and Range is full of counterexamples here, so I could just list off loads of them, but actually let's go a bit deeper than that. We're going to look at the world of music because that is an area very near and dear to me. I mean, I've got a guitar here and a model piano and cello here, but also because it's an example that the book goes in depth. So as a cellist, someone near and dear to me is Yo-Yo Ma, one of the greatest cellists ever, and is known for his amazing bark playing. I'm not going to go into my special interest now, I'm sorry. But one thing to note about Yo-Yo Ma is that in his first year of playing music, he didn't actually start on the cello. He played violin, he played viola, he played drums, I think maybe even piano, and yes, he did pick up cello early, and he did become an excellent cellist from a young age, but it wasn't where he started. He didn't specialise immediately. He had this period of playing other instruments first. Okay, so maybe not the best example because he did stick to cello from a young age. He just went through this kind of sampling period earlier, but we'll talk about the sampling period later. Let's go on for a different example. Range referred to a British boarding school that does auditions for students, and when they actually looked at the results, they found out that the students who started really young tended to be kind of middle of the pack, kind of average. Those that were considered exceptional, they were actually the people that spread their practice a little bit more evenly across 3 instruments. On a personal note, I actually put the book down and did like an excited little dance or something at this point, because as I alluded to earlier, the book literally says a number 3, and I play 3 instruments to an advanced standard, so you know, I could go and audition to this boarding school of music. Yeah, I might be a little bit too old for that at this point, but maybe a bit more on that later. But still, this got me excited because spreading myself too thin across 3 instruments wasn't actually a bad thing. The school found that the best approach was to actually have a sampling period across multiple instruments near the start and only specialise and increase practice volume and intensity in one particular instrument much later on. So actually the Yo-Yo Ma story isn't actually that dissimilar, because he might have had his sampling period at 3 years old and I might be going through mine right now at 30. So moving away from my music daydreams for now, I'm actually going to tell you about a fact that stuck with me from the first time I read this book 5 years ago in 2019 after it just came out. And that is the fact that although members of the public and scientists tend to have creative hobbies at about the same rate, scientists that are inducted into national academies tend to have creative hobbies at a much higher rate than the general population. And here's a big one. Those that have won the Nobel Prize are 22 times more likely to have some kind of performing experience like actor, musician, dancer or something like that. Just let that sink in a little bit. Nobel Prize winners are 22 times more likely to have a creative artistic hobby than general scientists. There are way more examples of this in the book Range, so go read that if you like some more examples. But I'm going to move on now because there are still specialists out there like Tiger Woods in the realm of golf. So what makes golf a realm where specialists excel, whereas music might be a little bit different? Epstein has an answer to this too. It's to do with the complexity of the domains, and I'm not ragging on golf here and saying it's easy. I would be a terrible golfist. I don't even know what the term is. I have no interest in golf. I would be terrible at golf. But it is true that in golf you have feedback quickly, you can see where the ball landed, and it's a kind environment to learn in because of that feedback approach. Whereas the real world, things aren't that straightforward and you don't always get instant feedback. Part 2, expertise. So the reason given in Range for specialists not being quite so effective in more complex environments is a term that they call cognitive entrenchment. And that concept is when you build up expertise in a scenario, you're so used to kind of the patterns, the way things tend to go, that a small shift away from that could completely throw you off effectively. One of the interesting examples they give here is to do with infrastructure projects. And it's to do with the fact that if you are too close to a project, you take too much of an insider view, then you're actually more likely to be wrong. And most global infrastructure projects, in fact 90% is the statistic the book gives, go over budget, over time, because everyone is just too close to the details and too optimistic because, you know, they've planned everything out and so it should go like that. The book refers to a stat from a study by one of PwC's subsidiaries. That's a really hard word to say. And they found that actually R&D spending and performance results actually didn't really correlate beyond the bottom 10% where you just didn't spend enough money. It wasn't the case that spending lots of more money to hire more specialists was actually beneficial, because you need generalists to integrate those results. The book is full of example after example of specialists who are getting it wrong in surprising and unintuitive ways. And I actually feel like I need to pause here because I'm maybe making the specialists that might be watching feel bad, but also I don't want to put a mistrust out there of experts. That's really not what I want to do. So let's just take a second here. Specialism isn't a bad thing in itself. We need specialists. There are areas and domains where specialism is the most important thing, and there are areas where it's not the most important thing, but it's still incredibly important. Specialist knowledge is important. It's just that in complex realms, a generalist needs to integrate that knowledge as well. And you know what the best combination is? A specialist and a generalist together. So specialists, we need you too. Part 3, education. So how are we ending up in a situation where specialism is highly valued and generalism really isn't? Well, Range dedicates an entire chapter into talking about how we learn, and I think the answer has something to do with this. I love how often this book kind of dovetails in my areas of interest, because the example it talks about here is maths, and if you don't know, that's my background. And it talks about how in maths education we're taught to follow processes and procedures rather than to develop a complex and deep understanding of the subject matter itself. The problem is when we're just learning procedures, we don't really have the opportunity to enhance our understanding beyond the procedures. We just do the procedures because they're quick to learn, but they miss out on that deep understanding. As like a personal aside, like I'm very conscious that my fingers are taped, and I almost took this off for the video, but I was like, I've like hurt my finger doing a hobby, and because I'm a generalist, so I think that's perfect for this video. Instead, to be able to learn something deeply, we actually kind of need to struggle. We need to get frustrated, we need to make mistakes, we need to learn from those mistakes. We learn best through spaced repetition, testing, and making connections ourselves. And thank goodness, because that struggle describes my jiu-jitsu experience this morning. This making connections is incredibly important because this allows us to create abstractions and then to transfer ideas from one area to another. These abstractions are important because they enable us to make analogies, and these analogies are really important for solving complex problems. So they give an example on how to treat a tumour, and basically when they lay out the example, about 10% of people come up with a solution for how to do the treatment. And then they presented the participants with an analogy, and after hearing the analogy, 30% of people were able to solve the challenge. When they were presented with a second analogy, up to 50% of the people were able to understand how to solve the problem. And when they were told to use this analogy to help them work out a solution, a whopping 80% of people worked out how to do it. That is a huge multiplier that comes from using analogies. Analogies enable us to take an outside view on a problem. When we're too close to the problem, we can get caught up in the details and get some of the problems I alluded to earlier. But by using an analogy, this enables us to step back and have a clearer picture. The example they use here is of the Netflix algorithm, but I believe the YouTube algorithm works in a very similar way, so let's talk about that as an example. So YouTube could build a model to try and understand me, to try and understand how my love for music I was rabbiting on about in the first part of this video correlates with my love for maths, which I mentioned to you earlier, and it could build all sorts of complex models to try and marry the two together. It could try fitting variables to understand how my love for guinea pigs means that I'm going to click on this jiu-jitsu video. Through trial and error, it could use all the information it's gathered about me to try and build the perfect model that Lee is going to watch this on YouTube model that's going to mean I click on every video it recommends me. That sounds like a very difficult problem to solve. I mean, the only way that I can connect guinea pigs to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is through special interests and hyperfixations through my ADHD. But then it would have to know that about me as well. And this seems really hard. So what if it just used analogies instead? Because it could use the analogy of comparing me to someone else, to seeing what they watch, what their interests are, and ways in which I'm similar to them or analogous to this person. Through that, it can pinpoint what videos I'm more likely to watch more accurately. And I mean, it doesn't always get it right. Some days I'm scrolling like, I don't want to watch any of this right now. But YouTube did actually diagnose me with ADHD before I even was confident I had it myself. And if you'd like to hear about that story, click the link up above to watch that video. So analogies are super important in a world like the one we're in with lots of complex problem solving, and the way that we can build up these analogies is through conceptually thinking. But in fact, that's not the whole picture, and I'm going to read a quote to you here. Breadth of training predicts breadth of transfer. That is, the more context in which something is learned, the more the learner creates abstract models and the less they rely on any particular example. So in order to make more abstractions, we need to learn in more context. Part 4, experimentation. I'm almost loath to bring her up given all the controversy around her, but setting aside all of that because it's not relevant to the conversation, I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time talking about J.K. Rowling. The book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which came out on the 26th of July in 1997, came out around about the time that J.K. Rowling was turning about 32 years. But it's not because of Harry Potter that Range uses her as an example in this book. Her career before publishing Harry Potter was actually kind of patchy. She worked a load of temp jobs, she bounced around doing all sorts of different things, and by any stretch of the imagination, she was kind of considered a late starter. She achieved success much later than we're meant to, something I'm very aware of now as a 30-something. I'm not a young adult anymore, I'm just an adult. But we can look at other examples. My teenage crush, because I loved Harrison Ford in Star Wars and Indiana Jones, actually wanted to be an actor but became a self-taught carpenter instead and didn't pivot into his acting career until he landed his breakout role at 35 years old. But 35 is still pretty young, so let's use another example. I recently stumbled across a YouTube short of Rick Beato here, talking about his varied career all over the music industry where he did a variety of different things before starting his hugely successful YouTube channel when he was in his 50s. These are individual examples of people who found success later in life, but I want to stress that they are not exceptions actually. They're not successful despite the fact that they started later in life. they're actually successful because of it. Range refers to a study of high achievers, and the goal of the study was actually to find high achievers who ended up in a successful and fulfilling role by an unconventional route to look at their experience. And when they set out, they expected about 1 in 5 people to fit the profile of an unconventional route, and actually they found out that this applied to almost every single one. In many ways, it's almost ridiculous that we're asked to make decisions as teenagers and young adults that have a huge impact on the rest of our lives, our careers, and just our lives in general. I mean, if you look back at yourself at 17 years old when you were making a decision about whether or not to go to university, or what to study if you did go, or what kind of career or job to pursue if you didn't go, are you the same person now? We change over time as we grow and mature, and actually our personality changes more than we would expect, or changes according to the context we're in. And that's what makes it so hard to set these kind of long-term goals, because we don't know how we're going to change in that time. And yet we still try and set them and feel bad about ourselves for not making them. Range looks at the situation of university here in the UK, whereas teens and early adults, we specialise super young in both England and Wales. I mean, when it came to my final school exams, I was studying maths, further maths and physics. However, they contrast that with Scotland, where people take more of a breadth of subjects and specialise a lot later. Turns out, while I thought my career switch was pretty exceptional, English and Welsh graduates are actually far more likely to switch careers than our Scottish counterparts, and our cultures really aren't that different. Because what we're missing when we specialise too early is that sampling period that I was talking about way back in the first part of this video. So it makes sense that you switch. You didn't get the opportunity to go through that sampling period before. You just had to put on your big person trousers and get out there and find a career. But as per Amina Ibarra, we learn who we are by living, not before. Whether you're someone who switches jobs regularly or not, big changes, especially if you're switching industry, are scary. And often we're told to not do that, to keep the thing as a hobby, to not risk making that change. And you know how many times I was told to keep my coaching business as a hobby and not make the career move? But we find a way to do it. We make the move, we adjust as we go, we gather information. I have no regrets about the choice that I made. And in fact, I'm not the only one. A Freakonomics study found that people that were considering a job change, of the ones that did it, they were actually much happier 6 months on, even if they experienced a financial penalty when they initially made the switch. And actually part of what inspired me to make this video is actually the struggle that so many of us ADHDers go through in the workplace. We change jobs more frequently, we have patchier histories, and it's often seen as a bad thing, and I really wanted to make a point about why it's not. Range posits 2 reasons why we might quit a job or a venture. The first is lack of persistence. This is too hard, therefore I'm giving up. The second one is lack of a match, lack of a fit. It might be that you've grown out of the role, or it just never really fit to begin with. And in that latter case, quitting isn't a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. It means we're progressing on the sampling period, we're learning, and we're working towards a better match. Experimentation is fundamentally hard. And it's fundamentally hard because it's going to have a lot of failure. I fail publicly regularly on this YouTube channel when I upload a video and it doesn't do anywhere near as well as I would like. Or maybe I put out a new marketing strategy for my business and I'm met with crickets in return. I'm failing regularly, but that's part of how experimentation works. But although experimentation comes with a lot of failures, it also gives opportunity for success, to go from that was okay to wow, this is actually what success looks like. So we're experimenting, we're sampling, we're learning, because all of these generalist activities ultimately lead to our success. Part 5, extrapolation. Whenever I read these businessy, self-helpy books, I always have in the back of my mind thinking about neurodivergence in the context of reading them, since I had my own diagnosis. So I want to talk about that a little bit here. This is actually part of a much wider point around diversity, because Range gives many examples where specific expertise fails, and actually it's generalism that is useful, but actually that generalism often doesn't just come from one person. It comes from a diverse group of people, all with different backgrounds, bringing something together that combines in a way to create new ideas and new ways of solving problems. Now, I know that the corporate world has accepted that diversity is important, at least in lip service, although I'd like to think more and more places are implementing it. But I think this really emphasises how important that diversity is, because those different backgrounds create more generalist teams who are just better at solving problems. The book does imply that a single person with more general experience is actually more useful than a group of people in which that general experience is spread a bit too thinly here. So diversity of experience in one person is important. That's diversity of learning, of experiences, and you guessed it, I'm building up to something here. I think neurodiversity is incredibly important here. At one point the book talks about alternative use tasks, like can you find an alternative use for this guitar rather than the obvious? And the whole point is that this encourages abstraction, thinking of conceptual ideas, building analogies, and building up that conceptual thinking we spoke about earlier. When I think of alternative use tasks, the thing that immediately comes to mind is the power that us oddball neurospices have to come up with these new ideas, wacky, off-the-wall ideas that neurotypical people just don't really tend to come up with. We tend to come up with pretty abnormal stuff at times. When I combine that with ADHD curiosity, the ADHD need for variety, hyperfixations, the learning, the developing, the breadth of knowledge of various different areas, I can see immediately how ADHD ties in so closely with the concept of generalism. So what does that mean for you watching? The ADHD or multipotentialite who clicks on this video because they want to take away something to build their own career? Well, here are the two takeaways that I'm bringing forwards. Number one, changing jobs, roles or industries is not a bad thing as long as we are changing to find a better match instead of just giving up because we're not persisting. It's part of the sampling period, part of the learning, part of the growing, part of the developing transferable skills, and quitting for the right reason is a good thing. And number two, you are not too old. You're just not too old. Even if you are retired right now and you're not interested in any of the career stuff that I mentioned already, you are not too old to do something that is important and something that you are proud of and something that is meaningful to you. You can still do that. And actually I have a third takeaway, but I don't have a way that's better to say it than Range itself, so I'm going to leave you with a quote. Even when you move on from an area of work or an entire domain, that experience is not wasted. Thank you for your attention today. Please like, comment and subscribe, and if you haven't seen it already, you might be interested in going back and watching my video on twice exceptional adults at work. Thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.